Do you truly know the people around you? You might think you can sense toxicity when it walks into the room. You believe you can feel when an energy is off, or when someone's behavior quietly steps over the line of what's acceptable. But what? If I told you the real threats aren't so obvious, that the most dangerous individuals don't look dangerous at all. They're not always loud or cruel. In fact, they might be soft-spoken, kind, even family, while you're busy guarding yourself. From the visible villains, you're unknowingly leaving the door wide open for something far more insidious: the unconscious mind of others invading yours. Carl Gustav Jung spent his entire life studying this invisible web. In his work, The Ego and the Unconscious, he showed us that the majority of what drives human behavior lies outside our conscious control. And this truth isn't just about you, it applies to everyone. That's exactly where the danger begins, because when someone remains blind to their own inner darkness, that darkness starts looking for a host, and often that host is you. Pause for a moment and ask yourself, how many times have you left a conversation feeling emotionally drained? How often have you been unfairly blamed or made to feel like the emotional savior of someone else's tragedy? Jung called this phenomenon projection, an unconscious defense mechanism where a person attributes to you what they can't face in themselves. The moment that happens, you stop being seen as a person. You become a screen, a mirror, an enemy, a savior, a villain, a fantasy, everything except yourself. But here's the truly terrifying part. You often don't even realize it's happening. You think you're helping. You believe you're being mature, compassionate, kind. But in reality, you're being pulled into a psychological field that was never yours. You're fighting battles that aren't yours. You're caught in cycles of pain that were never born within you, but now rule you. And it's not always about malice. Jung made it painfully clear. The greatest psychological threats don't come from deliberate evil, but from unconscious fragmentation. These are people who are not evil, but are dangerously unaware of themselves. They wear masks. They carry traumas. They walk around full of complexes and repressed desires. They're not trying to hurt you, but they do, quietly, persistently, invisibly. It doesn't come through the front door. It slips in through silences, through backhanded comments, through loaded looks, until suddenly you're doubting your reality. You're losing your center. You're becoming an extension of their shadow. Maybe this is already happening in a relationship, a friendship, at work, even within your own family. And maybe, just maybe, you've been blaming yourself, wondering what's wrong with you. The truth? Nothing. But there's something terribly wrong with how your empathy is being weaponized. You're being used as a vessel for someone else's unconscious material. In this video, we're going to reveal 6 types of individuals Jung would classify as emotionally dangerous, not because they're evil, but because they are ruled by internal forces they themselves do not understand. We will use Jung's own words from The Ego and the Unconscious, Archetypes and the Collective Unconscious, and Aion to help you recognize these energies in others, and perhaps even in yourself. Are you ready? Take a breath and proceed carefully, because once you see this, you won't be able to unsee it. Imagine living with someone who blames you for every emotion they feel, someone who turns your presence into a trigger, someone who makes you feel responsible for wounds you never caused. At first, they appear delicate, emotional, even deep, but over time, you realize you've stepped onto a battlefield that isn't yours, and you're already losing. This is the unconscious manipulator, a person unaware of their own trauma, who unconsciously projects their pain onto others as a means of psychic survival. Jung said, "What we do not confront in ourselves, we will encounter as fate. Sometimes that fate has a name, a face, and sits across from you at the dinner table." The unconscious manipulator is not acting out of conscious malice. They are driven by unintegrated wounds and emotional fragments they've never processed. And because they refuse to look inward, they turn outward, at you. You become the canvas for their chaos. They live in chronic projection. And Jung explained that projection, when unrecognized, causes psychic blindness, a condition where you are no longer seen as yourself, but as a symbol of what the other person denies in themselves. This is the game you didn't know you were playing. Suddenly, you're the villain in their story, or the savior, or the reason they're angry, sad, or falling apart. It's always you, never them, and it happens so subtly that you begin to ask yourself, was I insensitive? Did I say something wrong? Am I the toxic one? That's how manipulation works, not with force, but with emotional entanglement, without a word being raised, without a direct accusation. To make matters worse, these people often appear charismatic, insightful, emotionally intense. You think you understand them, you want to help, heal, save, but what you're actually doing is sacrificing your own mental health, trying to rescue someone who refuses to confront themselves, and the more you try, the deeper you sink. Jung warned that when you're cast into someone else's unconscious as a symbol, a savior, a villain, a surrogate parent, you stop being you. You become a psychological projection. To break free from this invisible prison, you need awareness. You must learn to recognize these patterns. Cut the cords and ask yourself, is this feeling really mine, or was it implanted? Because the unconscious manipulator doesn't storm in. They slip through your empathy, and once inside, they make a home in your psyche. But the manipulator is only one mask. Next, we'll examine another, far more deceptive, the bearer of the persona, the one who doesn't just project, but lives entirely in performance. All of this, our obsession with perfection, our desperate need to appear composed, moral, and in control, is nothing more than an attempt to keep the unconscious suppressed. But Jung was crystal clear. The stronger the persona, the more repressed the shadow. And the more repressed the shadow, the more violently it returns. You see this in people who explode over small things, who hold grudges for years, who sabotage relationships in subtle, passive-aggressive ways. These are the so-called difficult people, bitter, resentful, hypercritical, and no one can quite figure out why. The answer is in the shadow, unrecognized, unintegrated, unloved. But here's what most people don't realize. The shadow is not only made of darkness. Jung emphasized that the shadow also carries your denied gifts, your repressed creativity, your unlived strength. It holds everything you abandoned to be accepted, your fire, your power, your truth. But when it's ignored, all of that potential turns to poison. And that poison leaks into relationships, contaminates environments, and wounds the people closest to the one carrying it. Living with someone who represses their shadow is like living in an emotional minefield. You never know what will trigger an explosion until you're already bleeding, and this repression doesn't appear out of nowhere. It's often fueled by a false sense of superiority, a rigid moral ideal that turns guilt into a tool of control. This is where we meet the next archetype, the moral controller, the one who not only suppresses their own desires, but also makes you feel guilty for living yours. In the next section, we'll unmask this figure Jung warned us about, one of the greatest obstacles to psychic freedom, the so-called guardian of virtue, who, in truth, is at war with their own inner demons. Not every executioner carries a sword. Some use crosses, rules, dogmas, rehearsed phrases. These are the ones who claim to be driven by ethics and righteousness, but they're really just building a cage of guilt for themselves and everyone around them. Jung was deeply aware of this archetype. He warned that when morality becomes a mask, it turns into one of the most insidious forms of psychic repression. The moral controller doesn't integrate their shadow. They project it. They cast their denied impulses onto others and judge them harshly for it. You've likely encountered someone like this, always pointing fingers, never turning inward. They position themselves as moral authorities, not because they are, but because they need to appear pure to avoid facing their own contradictions. Jung explained, "The greater the repression, the greater the need to project." And that's exactly what the moral controller does. They call others immoral, sinful, or deviant just to maintain the illusion of inner purity. But what makes them so dangerous is that they truly believe they're doing good. They think they're saving you, guiding you, fixing you. And that makes their influence even more toxic because it comes disguised as love, concern, or spiritual guidance. They'll say things like, "I'm telling you this for your own good," or "You'll thank me later." But their truth is not truth. It's projection. It's shadow in disguise. In his book Aion, Jung discusses Christ and Antichrist not as good and evil figures, but as psychological symbols of integration versus dissociation. The moral controller thinks they embody the light, but in reality, they are deeply disconnected from their own darkness. They don't recognize the shadow within, so they see it everywhere else. And that's what makes them blind, dangerous, incapable of seeing the subtlety and complexity of the human soul. If you live close to someone like this, you may start to feel like you're always in the wrong, even when you're just being yourself. You feel watched, judged, silenced, and worst of all, you begin to internalize that judgment. You start editing yourself, shrinking, suppressing your own truth to avoid disapproval. Their morality becomes your prison. This dynamic is common in rigid families, religious institutions, and cultures where obedience is mistaken for virtue. Jung saw it as a serious threat to individuation, the journey of becoming who you truly are, because where there's excessive moralism, there is usually a deep lack of self-awareness. Extreme moralists don't seek truth. They seek control. And when they can't control the outside world, they control the internal world of those around them. But the moral controller isn't the only one ruled by unconscious forces. There is another type, far more unstable, volatile, and dangerous. This is the complexed individual. Unlike the moralist, who represses and projects, the complexed person is fully possessed by unconscious material. They don't control it. It controls them. And in the next part, we'll explore this raw, explosive territory where trauma hijacks behavior and emotions become weapons. Imagine living with someone who, in one moment, is warm, generous, loving, and in the next, they explode in rage, fall into silence, or accuse you of things you never did. A compliment turns into a demand. A joke becomes an insult. A hug is seen as a threat. No matter what you do, it's never right. You're walking on unstable ground, and it's exhausting. According to Jung, these are the effects of complexes, autonomous fragments of psyche formed from trauma, memory, and unresolved emotion. These complexes live in the unconscious, but they take control of the conscious self like emotional puppeteers. A simple comment can trigger abandonment wounds. A harmless gesture can spark memories of humiliation. The reaction is never about you. It's about a past wound you didn't create, but the complexed person doesn't know this. When they erupt in rage or spiral into despair, they believe they're reacting to the present. They're not. They're reliving the past and dragging you into it. And the worst part? It happens in waves, moments of peace, then chaos, affection, then withdrawal, which makes the bond with them even more addictive. You hold on to the good moments, believing the nightmare is temporary. But those good moments are followed by unpredictable storms that leave you lost, confused, and constantly on guard. You adapt, you soften, you shrink. You walk on eggshells, not realizing that no matter what you do, that storm was always coming. Because the monster you fear isn't awakened by you, it already lives inside the other. Unrecognized complexes, Jung warned, eventually colonize the psyche. They speak for you, feel for you, act for you. the complex person may be consumed by narratives of inferiority, martyrdom, abandonment, or persecution. And the more you try to maintain peace, the more you feed the illusion that peace is even possible. Being close to someone like this is like living in a war zone with invisible landmines. You never know when the next explosion will happen. And slowly, you begin to lose touch with your own reality. You doubt your memory, your feelings, your truth. And in time, you begin to be colonized by their unconscious. But we're not done. Yet, because there's one more type, quieter, subtler, but equally destructive. The person who doesn't explode, doesn't accuse, doesn't shout, but drains you completely. The psychic vampire. This is the final archetype Jung hinted at. Someone who doesn't want your presence. They want your energy. They won't use violence. They won't scream. Instead, they'll drain you through subtle demands, chronic victimhood, emotional dependency disguised as love. In Jungian terms, this is the unresolved symbiotic relationship, a pathological bond that prevents psychic growth and blurs the boundaries of the self. These people need constant reassurance, daily attention, endless comfort. But beneath all that neediness is a void, a psychic emptiness that you will never be able to fill. At first, you offer support. Then, you give time. Then, you endure emotional abuse in the name of compassion. Until one day, you realize you don't know where you end, and they begin. You feel soul-level exhaustion, not just physical fatigue, but a spiritual draining that leaves you hollow. Jung described people who, unable to stand on their own, attach themselves to others like emotional parasites. And while it sounds harsh, it's the truth. The psychic vampire does not want to grow. They want to be carried, and the most dangerous part? You'll feel guilty for needing space, selfish for craving silence, cold for wanting boundaries because the psychic vampire is a master of reversal. One moment the victim, the next the accuser, one moment the dependent, the next the manipulator. And before you know it, your life becomes about maintaining peace, about avoiding the next emotional collapse, about surviving a relationship that's slowly killing your soul. But here's the path out. Jung taught that we must make the unconscious conscious, not just in others, but in ourselves, because maybe at some point in your life you've been the vampire, the complex, the moral controller, or the bearer of the mask. None of us are immune. We all have shadows. We all carry pain. The difference is some have the courage to face it, others project it. This video is a mirror, a map, a call to look deeper. If you've made it this far, it means you're ready to see, to name, to break free. That is the beginning of true freedom. It's not about blaming others. It's about reclaiming sovereignty over your inner world. Now, I want to hear from you. Which of these archetypes have you faced? And, more bravely, which ones? Do you recognize within yourself? Your comment could be the spark that lights someone else's path. And before you go, remember, the next video takes this journey even deeper. If this spoke to your soul, don't stop here. Keep going. Because the more light we shed on the unconscious, the less it controls us. See you there.